Section 1. The Impossible Promise. Richmond, California, 1941. December 7th, 1941. The day the world changed. As the news of Pearl Harbor crackled through the radios of America, one man stood quietly in his California office, staring out at the fog rolling over the San Francisco Bay. His name was Henry J. Kaiser, a construction magnate, not a naval man. No rank, no medals. Just a builder who believed that anything mechanical could be made faster. Outside his window, the skeletal frames of the Richmond shipyards were rising from mud and marsh. In a few short months, they would become the heart of a miracle. But that morning, all Kaiser could see was the impossible order that had just landed on his desk. The U.S. Navy needed cargo ships, thousands of them. Fast. Each one 441 feet long, 56 feet wide, capable of carrying over 9,000 tons of supplies, fuel, and men across U-boat-infested seas. Traditionally, a ship like that took 230 days to build. Washington wanted them in less than 60. In the words of one admiral, "Mr. Kaiser, we're asking you to do what can't be done." Kaiser simply smiled. Then, he said, "We'll have to do it differently." What he meant was more than engineering. It was philosophy. Kaiser had never built a ship before, but he had built dams, tunnels, and bridges that defied physics. The Hoover Dam, the Grand Coulee, the Boulder Canyon project, all ahead of schedule. He understood one thing better than any admiral. Organization beats tradition. Instead of building ships from the keel up, he envisioned something radical, an assembly line, not unlike Detroit's automobile factories. Ships would be built in pieces, prefabricated in separate workshops and welded, not riveted, together. Every pipe, bulkhead, and panel would arrive ready to fit, like a puzzle made of steel. His engineers protested, his welders doubted, the Navy laughed. But Kaiser saw what they didn't. Speed was now a weapon. If America could outbuild Germany's submarines, it could win the Atlantic before ever firing a shot. That winter night, as the fog swallowed the bay, Kaiser turned to his team and declared, "We're not building ships. We're building hope." And with that, the Liberty ship experiment began, an industrial gamble that would change the very definition of what was possible in war. Section 2. The Factory That Never Slept. Spring 1942, Richmond Shipyards. We'll continue seamlessly from where this left off. The first sparks flew before dawn. By March 1942, the Richmond shipyards were alive, a city within a city. Floodlights cut through the coastal fog, painting long shadows of cranes and scaffolds against the bay. The ground shook with the thunder of steel plates being dropped into place. It wasn't a shipyard anymore. It was a living organism, breathing, pounding, unstoppable. At the center of it all, Henry Kaiser stood in a hard hat and heavy coat, clipboard in hand. He wasn't inspecting ships. He was inspecting people. Thousands of them. Men, women, black, white, young, old. America itself had come to build. They called it the night shift nation. For 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, torches hissed, cranes groaned, and furnaces glowed orange. Ship sections rolled in from dozens of sub-assembly plants like car parts from Detroit, pre-fitted, pre-cut, pre-welded. The air reeked of hot iron and ambition. Kaiser had reinvented everything. He replaced master craftsmen with specialists, each trained for one precise task. One team welded hull plates, another installed propeller shafts, a third fitted lifeboats. Each unit moved in rhythm like an orchestra of industry. The journalist from Life magazine visiting the yard wrote, "It's like watching Detroit's Ford assembly line, only everything's made of steel and fire." But what truly set Kaiser's shipyards apart wasn't just machinery. It was humanity. He hired women when others refused. He opened childcare centers beside the shipways so mothers could weld while their children played safely nearby. He built clinics and hospitals, offering healthcare to every worker, something unheard of in wartime America. They came from every corner of the country: farmers from Kansas, miners from Pennsylvania, housewives from Oregon. Within months, Richmond's population exploded from 20,000 to over 100,000. Cafeterias fed 10,000 workers a meal. Buses ran all night. One welder, a woman named Rosie Dawson, would later recall, "You didn't feel tired, you felt important. You were building something that mattered." By summer, the first Liberty ship began to take shape, SS John Henry. Welders worked side by side, racing not against time but against disbelief. The first hull was clumsy, the seams were rough. The Navy skeptics circled like vultures. Then came the deadline. The ship had to be ready in under 60 days. Kaiser promised 45. When SS John Henry slid down the ways into the bay, 42 days after her keel was laid, cheers erupted across the yard. Whistles blew. Men hugged. Women cried. But Henry Kaiser wasn't smiling. He leaned toward his foreman and said quietly, 42 days is good. Let's see how we do it in 10. The race for the impossible had just begun. Section 3. Steel and Speed. Summer 1943. The assembly line of the sea. By mid-1943, the impossible had become routine. The Richmond shipyards no longer built ships one at a time. They built fleets. From above, the coastline looked like a metallic forest, hundreds of cranes reaching into the sky, smoke pillars rising like war banners over the Pacific. Each day began with a whistle at 6 a.m. and ended never. The factory never slept. Sparks from 1,000 torches rained down on the decks. Hammers clanged like distant gunfire. The air vibrated with the rhythm of productivity, a new kind of warfare, fought not with bullets, but with blueprints. Henry Kaiser walked through it all with a stopwatch and a dream. His engineers timed every movement, how long it took to weld a section, to install a boiler, to mount a gun. If one task took too long, it was studied, dissected, improved. They didn't call it shipbuilding anymore. They called it process control. The Liberty ship, once dismissed as slow and ugly, had become America's steel miracle. Each one could carry 10,000 tons of cargo, tanks, jeeps, rations, even entire locomotive engines. They sailed the Atlantic and Pacific, feeding armies, rebuilding nations, and replacing every convoy sunk by German U-boats. And they came faster than anyone believed possible. In 1941, it took 230 days to build a cargo ship. By 1943, Kaiser's yards launched one every 4 days. 4 days from keel to ocean. When the Robert E. Peary launched in November 1942, built in just 4 days and 15 hours, newsreels captured the astonishment of the world. Reporters from London to Sydney replayed the footage of welders cheering, smoke pouring from cranes, and banners reading, "Built by American hands, built for freedom." President Roosevelt himself watched the footage and said, "We may have found the weapon Hitler can't outbuild." But speed came with risk. Some Liberty ships cracked in half under strain, a flaw in the brittle steel. Kaiser didn't hide from it. He called his welders together and told them, "Mistakes are the price of progress. We'll fix it. And go faster." He brought in metallurgists, redesigned hull plates, and strengthened seams. Within weeks, the issue was solved. Production didn't stop for a single day. As the ships rolled out one after another, workers began to name them after poets, teachers, and heroes. Each vessel bore a piece of the soul of the people who built her. The SS John Keats, the SS Harriet Tubman, the SS Booker T. Washington. A war fought on ideals now had floating symbols of democracy itself. One worker wrote in chalk across a hull before launch, "Every rivet here is a vote against tyranny." By the end of 1943, the yards had produced more ships than the entire German Navy had left. But for Henry Kaiser, the true victory wasn't just numbers. It was proof that civilian imagination could outfight military convention. And the world had only seen the beginning. Section 4. The War Machine That Breathed. Winter, 1943 to 1944. Across the American coast. By the winter of 1943, what had started as a single experiment in California had become an empire of steel stretching across the United States. From Richmond to Portland, from Baltimore to Mobile, Henry J. Kaiser's methods had been adopted nationwide. America's coastlines were no longer quiet harbors. They were the lungs of a living, breathing war machine. In Portland, Oregon, shipyards hummed under falling snow. Floodlights burned through the mist as half-finished Liberty ships waited in dry docks like iron giants waiting to awaken. Women in welding masks, Rosie the riveters, worked shoulder to shoulder with veterans too old for the front. The clang of hammers never stopped. It was the sound of national unity, of defiance made tangible. In Richmond, California, Kaiser's yards had become the most productive shipyard on Earth. 27,000 workers on rotating shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Cafeterias served meals every 2 hours. Trainloads of steel arrived by dawn and were gone by nightfall, transformed into hulls that would cross oceans within weeks. And still, Kaiser wanted more. He introduced modular prefabrication, slicing each ship into over 250 individual pieces built simultaneously in separate factories. It was a technique so advanced that Navy engineers called it lunacy, until they saw it work. Every ship had a berth number, every section a deadline. When one part fell behind, another raced ahead. It was chaos turned into choreography. Kaiser didn't just build faster, he built smarter. He created a logistics web that stretched across America. From the Bethlehem steel mills in Pennsylvania to engine plants in Michigan, from the welding electrode factories in Illinois to the dry docks of Oregon. Each part of the nation was now a gear in the same machine. A foreman at the Richmond yard once said, "You could smell victory in the steel dust." By 1944, the production figures were staggering. 1 Liberty ship every 4 days, 3 escort carriers every week, dozens of tankers every month. Kaiser's philosophy of speed was no longer a gamble. It was America's greatest strategic weapon. And the world took notice. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill called the Liberty ship the vessel that won the Atlantic. German intelligence reports began describing the Allied shipping rate as mechanized madness. And in the bunkers of Berlin, Admiral Karl Dönitz, head of the U-boat fleet, read the numbers with disbelief. For every U-boat he sent to sink 1 Liberty ship, America built 10 more. The arithmetic of defeat had begun to right itself. As the tide of war turned in 1944, the convoys that once crept across the Atlantic now sailed boldly, in long columns of Liberty ships escorted by destroyers. The sea, once ruled by German submarines, had become an American highway. And in his modest office above the Richmond docks, Henry Kaiser smiled as he watched another Liberty ship slide down the ways into the water. "We used to measure time in days," he said softly. Now, we measure it in ships. He wasn't just building vessels anymore. He was building the rhythm of victory. Section 5. The 4-Day Miracle. March 1944, Richmond, California. March 1944, a chill wind whipped across the San Francisco Bay as thousands of workers gathered under floodlights that burned like captured stars. Word had spread through the shipyards like wildfire. Henry Kaiser was about to attempt the impossible. A brand new Liberty ship was to be built in record time, not weeks, not days, hours. The target was 4 days from keel to launch. Every worker, every welder, every crane operator knew what was at stake. This wasn't just another ship. It was a statement to the world. American industry had become faster than destruction itself. At sunrise, sparks burst to life. Steel sections, each marked, numbered, and ready, began rolling in from warehouses and fabrication yards. Trucks, forklifts, and rail cranes moved in perfect rhythm. The pounding of rivets merged with the hiss of torches into a symphony of progress. Supervisors shouted over the noise, "Section 12 to Dock 3! Hull seam alignment in 2 hours! Watch that weld, we're ahead of schedule." From the catwalk above, Kaiser watched the chaos with folded arms. His son Edgar beside him looked stunned. "They'll never make it," he said. Kaiser's answer was simple, almost a whisper lost in the roar. "They already have." Every hour another section locked into place. Hull, deck, superstructure. The skeleton of the ship rose from the mud like a living thing. By the second night, the bay shimmered with the reflection of welding arcs. Reporters from Life, Time, and Newsweek arrived, notebooks trembling in their hands as they scribbled history. By the dawn of the 4th day, the final weld sparked shut. Steam whistled, horns blared. Workers stood shoulder to shoulder, faces blackened by soot, eyes alight with pride. At 2:25 p.m., the new ship, SS Robert E. Peary, slid down the ways into the Pacific Ocean, flags streaming from her mast. It had taken 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. The crowd erupted. Thousands cheered, wept, and embraced. Welders climbed onto scaffolding, waving helmets in the air. Women kissed their gloves, whispering prayers of thanks. A journalist captured the moment. It wasn't a launch, it was a miracle performed by the hands of ordinary people. Henry Kaiser didn't make a speech. He simply tipped his hat to the workers and said, "If we can do this in 4 days, gentlemen, what else can't we do?" That night, the shipyard lights burned brighter than ever before. Other factories sent telegrams of congratulations. Even President Roosevelt, reading the report in Washington, smiled and murmured, "That's democracy's answer to tyranny." The Robert E. Peary would go on to serve faithfully through the end of the war, but her legacy was greater than any voyage she made. She proved that the war could be won not just by courage, but by coordination. Kaiser's method became legend. Speed through organization, power through people. And as the world watched Liberty ships flood the seas, a quiet realization spread among America's enemies. They weren't fighting men anymore. They were fighting momentum. Section 6. Engines of Democracy. Summer 1944. The Atlantic Convoys. By the summer of 1944, Liberty ships were no longer a miracle. They were an army of steel. Across the Atlantic, the ocean seemed alive with movement, convoys stretching from horizon to horizon, gray silhouettes crawling steadily toward Europe. Each one carried food, fuel, ammunition, tanks, and men, the lifeblood of the Allied war effort. It was said that every minute the Liberty ship left an American port. From New York to Norfolk, from Galveston to San Francisco, they steamed out under cover of fog and secrecy. Painted dull gray, built for endurance, not beauty, They weren't graceful, but they were unstoppable. Sailors joked that a Liberty ship looked like it had been designed with a straight ruler and built with a hammer. But they also said something else. The only thing uglier than a Liberty ship is a world without them. Inside the cramped steel corridors, you could hear the heartbeat of the war. Engines roared deep in the hull, massive 2,500 horsepower triple expansion steam engines, driving the ship at a steady 11 knots. The smell of oil mixed with salt water and coffee. In the galley, cooks stirred giant pots of stew while gunners oiled their 20mm Oerlikons on deck. Every man aboard knew the risk. The U-boats still hunted, waiting beneath the waves. Convoys zigzagged across the Atlantic in silence, their lights blacked out, radios muted. One torpedo could send 9,000 tons of cargo and 50 lives to the bottom. But something had changed. The convoys no longer feared the ocean. They owned it. The Liberty ships came faster than the U-boats could sink them. Each time Admiral Donitz boasted of sinking 20 ships, America built 40 more. For the first time in the war, Allied supply tonnage rose instead of fell. On one June night, as storm clouds rolled over the North Atlantic, the crew of the SS Jeremiah O'Brien watched streaks of light flash in the distance, explosions from a convoy under attack. Yet, even as the sea burned, more ships pressed on, engines thundering through the dark. A young seaman wrote in his diary, "It feels like the ocean itself is made of ships now." And behind that ocean of ships stood one man, Henry Kaiser, and the idea that changed everything: production as warfare. He had proven that industry was the new battlefield. The Allies weren't just outfighting the Axis, they were outbuilding them. For every Panzer tank Germany rolled out, America built 10 Sherman tanks. For each, 2. For every Luftwaffe fighter, America launched 50 Hellcats. And for every U-boat, America launched 100 Liberty ships. By mid-1944, even the generals admitted what the soldiers already knew. The tide of steel had turned. D-Day was launched that June. Thousands of Liberty ships carried the invasion across the Channel, the largest amphibious armada in history. Every bullet, every ration tin, every gallon of gasoline used in Normandy had crossed the Atlantic inside a Liberty ship. The Liberty ship wasn't glamorous, it wasn't fast, it wasn't beautiful, but it was there, always there, reliable, tireless, and American. Henry Kaiser once said, "Wars are won by courage, yes, but courage is useless without the tools to carry it." And in 1944, the Liberty ship was that tool, the unbreakable bridge between freedom and victory. Section 7. The Industrial Soldier. Winter 1944 to 1945. The War at Home. While Liberty ships carried men and munitions across the seas, another army, invisible but equally vital, marched at home. They didn't wear helmets or carry rifles. They wore goggles, gloves, and overalls. They were welders, machinists, pipe fitters, and electricians. The industrial soldiers of Henry Kaiser's revolution. In the freezing winter of 1944, Richmond, California pulsed with unbroken energy. The shipyard lights never dimmed, even as rain soaked the cranes and salt wind whipped across the docks. Women with scarves tied over their hair walked shoulder to shoulder beside men just returned from the front with missing limbs. Everyone worked. Everyone belonged. Kaiser's genius wasn't just speed. It was inclusion. When traditional contractors rejected women, he hired them. When others segregated by race, he refused. His yards became the most diverse workplaces in America, years before civil rights had a name. One of his supervisors, an African-American foreman named Leroy Washington, once said to a reporter, "Out there on the docks, nobody cares what color your hands are, only that you can hold the torch steady." And they did. Every spark that lit up the night sky was a piece of democracy being welded into existence. In the lunch halls, soldiers home on leave sat beside factory workers still covered in soot, trading stories of battlefields and blueprints. There was no separation between front line and home front anymore. They had merged into one purpose: to finish the fight. Kaiser believed morale was a weapon, too. He introduced paid medical care for every worker and their family, a first in American industrial history. His hospital plan would later evolve into what we now know as Kaiser Permanente. He gave his workers housing, schools, and transportation. He built daycares where mothers could leave their children safely before climbing into the welding pits. He gave them pride, and they gave him ships. By early 1945, Kaiser's empire had built 1,490 Liberty ships at Richmond alone. Nationwide, his methods had produced over 2,700. Each one carried a plaque reading, "Built by American Workers for Liberty." Across the world, the impact was undeniable. The German war machine was starving. Their tanks had no fuel, their submarines had no steel, their armies no supplies. Hitler's dream of total conquest had drowned beneath a flood of Liberty ships. In his last days, Admiral Dönitz would later admit, "We had the better submarines, but they had the better factories." That was Henry Kaiser's victory. A man who never wore a uniform, yet built a weapon more powerful than any general's army. And as 1945 dawned, the world was beginning to understand something new. Wars were no longer won only by courage or tactics. They were won by the capacity to build. The torch, the wrench, and the hammer had become instruments of freedom. And for millions of Americans, the hum of machinery had replaced the sound of fear. Section 8. The Legacy of Steel. September 1945. The War's End. September 2nd, 1945. Tokyo Bay. The guns of war had fallen silent. On the deck of the USS Missouri, the Empire of Japan surrendered. The Second World War, the bloodiest conflict in human history, was over. Far from the Pacific, in a quiet corner of California, the shipyards of Richmond stood still for the first time in years. The cranes were silent. The floodlights dimmed. The forges cooled. And for the men and women who had lived by the rhythm of welding sparks and sirens, the silence felt almost unreal. Henry Kaiser walked through his now quiet yard, boots crunching on the dust that once shimmered with steel filings. Around him lay the skeletons of unfinished hulls, frozen mid-construction when the surrender came. He paused, placing a hand on the cold metal, and smiled faintly. "You did your job," he whispered. "Every single one of you." Across the sea, Liberty ships were still working. They carried soldiers home, ferried food to starving Europe, and delivered supplies to rebuild nations once torn apart. Many of them would keep sailing for decades, their boxy silhouettes crossing the oceans of peace they had helped to create. In total, the United States built 2,710 Liberty ships, each a monument to speed, ingenuity, and the ordinary citizens who made them. They carried 2/3 of all cargo shipped during the war. They fed armies, rebuilt empires, and kept democracy moving, one convoy at a time. Historians would later say that Henry Kaiser didn't just build ships. He built the industrial soul of America. He had proved that imagination could be stronger than fear, that a civilian could outthink the generals and outpace the enemy. When asked after the war how he achieved it, Kaiser simply said, "We didn't think about limits. We thought about needs." That simple philosophy, do it faster, do it better, do it together, reshaped not only shipbuilding but American industry itself. His health plans became national models. His prefabrication systems revolutionized construction. His belief in people over pedigree changed how the nation viewed its own strength. And in museums today, the surviving Liberty ships, the SS Jeremiah O'Brien in San Francisco, the SS John W. Brown in Baltimore, still float proudly, their decks echoing with the footsteps of visitors who can almost hear the ghosts of the welders, riveters, and dreamers who built them. Standing on the bridge of one of those ships, you can still feel it, the hum of engines long gone quiet, the faint scent of oil and salt, and the presence of thousands of hands that once worked in perfect rhythm, the rhythm that beat tyranny. When victory came, it didn't arrive on wings or with cannons. It came on the deck of a Liberty ship, carried by the will of a nation that refused to quit. The four-day miracle had become the enduring symbol of a truth Henry Kaiser always knew. No empire, no tyrant, and no war can outlast the spirit of people who know how to build.